Chuck Berry, Little Richard. Never was a big fan of Elvis, really, except for like his early records like Hound Dog, the hard ones.
In the haze of Detroit's underground music scene, where cigarette smoke clung to denim jackets and Marshall stacks howled like restless ghosts, there stood a man who refused to be anything less than real. Bob Seger, the blue-collar bard of Middle America, wasn't just another rocker trying to ride the radio waves. He was the sound of Rust Belt's struggle, a roaring engine of truth wrapped in gravel vocals and raw guitar riffs. With hits like Night Moves and Turn the Page, Seger carved out a place in the American soundscape that was equal parts intimate diary and stadium anthem. But for every fan who blasted against the wind from the driver's seat of a Ford Mustang, there was a fellow musician watching from the sidelines, unimpressed, offended, or even outright furious. Because while Seger was building his legacy, some of his peers felt like he was stepping on toes, stealing the spotlight, or diluting what rock music was supposed to be. And over the years, the quiet respect between artists turned into tension, resentment, and in some cases, full-blown animosity. Not every feud made headlines. Some whispers lived only in studio halls or backstage dressing rooms. But make no mistake, Seger's rise to fame left behind a trail of burned bridges, bruised egos, and bitter commentary from some of rock's most iconic voices. These aren't just petty squabbles. They're windows into a deeper conflict that's always haunted the music world, the fight between authenticity and fame, between art and commerce. And no one straddled that line or challenged others over it quite like Bob Seger. One of the earliest and loudest voices of disapproval came from none other than Ted Nugent, the self-proclaimed Motor City madman and a man who never once hesitated to speak his mind. You'd think that two rockers coming up from the same gritty Detroit streets might have formed some brotherhood. Instead, what they formed was a cold war of musical ideologies. It started in the early 1970s when Seger's thoughtful, melody-driven style was gaining traction across the Midwest, while Nugent was still thrashing away in the underground, playing hard-edged, primal rock laced with hunting metaphors and guitar solos that felt like they might set the amps on fire. According to those who were there, club owners, roadies, fellow musicians, Nugent started throwing shade, telling people Seger had gone soft, that real rock doesn't need love songs and piano intros. The comments trickled through the grapevine and eventually landed at Seger's ears. And while he never responded publicly, friends say he took it personally. This wasn't just criticism of a song. It was a dismissal of everything Seger stood for, the idea that rock could have vulnerability, that pain and poetry belonged in the same lyric. Nugent reportedly accused Seger of selling out to the suits, turning rock into something safe and radio-friendly. The irony, of course, is that Nugent himself would later chase commercial success, but at the time, the division was clear. One man was chasing truth through melody. The other was chasing adrenaline through noise. And for a while, their paths crossed in uncomfortable silence, especially when sharing lineups at Detroit festivals. One witness recalled an event at Cobo Hall where Nugent walked right past Seger without a word, muttering to his crew, "Some people forget where they came from." Whether Seger had changed or simply evolved, the judgment lingered, sharp, personal, and impossible to ignore. But maybe no feud cut deeper than the one with Glenn Frey. Not because it was loud or public, but because it felt like a betrayal. Frey, one of the founding members of the Eagles, was also a Detroit native. He and Seger had walked the same streets, played the same grimy clubs, and shared the same dream, to take the stories of their hometowns and turn them into something timeless. You'd think that kind of shared heritage would unite them. Instead, it divided them. Their paths first crossed in the early 70s, before either had really broken through. At the time, Frey was chasing the California sound, smooth harmonies, desert vibes, and a clean, polished brand of rock that would eventually define a generation. Seger, meanwhile, was still grinding it out in the Midwest, playing to factory workers and writing lyrics about long nights and fading youth. According to several people close to the scene, Frey allegedly said, "He's got the voice, but none of the vision." Detroit rock is going nowhere. It was a dismissive remark, and whether or not Seger heard it directly, the sentiment got back to him. He reportedly told his manager at the time, "Glenn doesn't believe in what we're doing here." As the years went on and both men found massive success, Seger with Live Bullet and Frey with Hotel California, the tension remained. Frey supposedly saw Seger as regional, someone who lacked the ambition or polish to play on the world stage. And when Seger finally hit #1, insiders say Frey was less than gracious. "I guess Detroit had something to say after all," he reportedly muttered to a Rolling Stone writer. For Seger, who had built a career on proving doubters wrong, Frey's early dismissal was a scar that never quite faded. Two hometown boys, two different paths, and a rivalry rooted not in hatred, but in something even more complicated, disappointment. Then came John Mellencamp, the Indiana rebel who, like Seger, sang for the working man. On paper, they should have been allies. In practice, they were competitors chasing the same crown, King of American Heartland Rock. Mellencamp burst onto the scene in the early '80s with a chip on his shoulder and an album, American Fool, that climbed the charts with speed. His songs were raw, defiant, and laced with the kind of small-town grit Seger had been mining for years. But instead of paying homage to Seger, Mellencamp came out swinging. According to music journalists from that era, Mellencamp privately mocked Seger as someone who pretends to live the life he sings about. He reportedly told people, "There's artists who live that life and there's artists who just visit it." The implication was clear. Seger, in Mellencamp's eyes, was more actor than believer. The tension reached a boiling point in 1985 at Farm Aid, the massive benefit concert both were scheduled to play. Rumors swirled that Mellencamp had purposely overlapped his set with Seger's, forcing fans to choose. Backstage, the vibe was icy. One crew member said Seger looked genuinely hurt, not just by the rivalry, but by the fact that someone so similar in style saw him as a threat instead of a brother. Mellencamp, for his part, never apologized. And while he would later soften publicly, calling Seger a legend, those close to the Silver Bullet band say that night in '85 changed how Seger viewed the music world, no longer as a place of mutual respect, but as a battleground for territory, pride, and authenticity. Others would follow. Artists like Don Henley reportedly found Seger's sound too sentimental, while punk rockers from the East Coast dismissed him as dad rock long before that term even existed. Bruce Springsteen, the only peer often compared directly to Seger, was more complicated. They respected each other, certainly, but there was an unspoken rivalry there too. Two storytellers from working-class roots, both writing about the lives of ordinary people, both trying to out-authentic each other on every track. Springsteen's camp once joked that Seger was Jersey and denim. Seger, never one for public jabs, is said to have kept quiet, but he noticed. He always noticed. The thing is, Seger never wanted to be part of the circus. He didn't chase the tabloids. He wasn't flashy. And that frustrated a lot of people in an industry where showmanship was currency. Seger was stubborn. He kept his circle small. He didn't play the political games of LA or New York, and in doing so, he isolated himself, beloved by fans, but often misunderstood by his peers. What's fascinating, though, is that through all the tension, Bob Seger never once responded with venom. He didn't release diss tracks. He didn't show up in gossip columns. He let the music speak. Maybe that's why the Feuds hit so hard, because for Seger, every note came from someplace real. When someone questioned his authenticity, they weren't just criticizing a song, they were questioning his soul. And that's something you can't shake off with a clever lyric or a chart-topping single. So while Seger went on to sell millions, to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and to tour until his knees gave out, these rivalries remained like phantom pains from old wounds. Quiet reminders that not everyone who applauds you from the crowd actually hopes you succeed. For every chorus of Like a Rock, there was someone backstage wondering why that spotlight wasn't shining on them. But that's the price of being real in a world that rewards the polished. Bob Seger never asked for war, but in telling his truth, he started more than a few. And sometimes that's what makes a legend. For John Mellencamp, Bob Seger wasn't just another name on the charts. He was the embodiment of everything Mellencamp believed had gone wrong in the music industry. Mellencamp saw Seger's work not as heartfelt homage to the working class, but as a watered-down, sanitized version of real-life pain dressed up in commercial packaging. In Mellencamp's eyes, Seger was taking stories that deserved to be sung in sweat-stained intimacy and transforming them into mass-market anthems, arena-sized, radio-ready products built for profit, not truth. The irony, of course, is that both men ended up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, both became iconic voices for America's underdog, each in his own way. But while Mellencamp dug deep into stripped-down grit and anti-corporate rebellion, Seger balanced vulnerability with accessibility. To Mellencamp, it was the difference between living the life and just singing about it. Even though they were telling the same story of rural hope, blue-collar sacrifice, and heartland pride, they could never agree on what made that story honest. One man clung to rawness, the other to resonance. Their feud was never as public as some others, but behind closed doors, the resentment simmered for years. In some ways, it was never really about music. It was about identity, about who got to claim the role of America's authentic voice. Don Henley's clash with Bob Seger, however, wasn't rooted in style. It was a collision of ego, precision, and studio warfare. Henley, the meticulous architect behind so many of the Eagles' lush harmonies, was a known perfectionist, someone who would spend days chasing a single vocal take until it felt absolutely flawless. Seger, in contrast, thrived on spontaneity. He chased that live, human energy, the magic of the first or second take, where emotion trumps polish. Their two worlds collided in 1978 inside a high-end Los Angeles recording complex, where both artists were booked in different studios at the same time. According to engineer Elliot Shiner, Henley barged into Seger's session without warning, listened for a few moments, then sneered, "This is how you make a record when you don't care about the details." It wasn't just rude, it was deeply insulting, especially coming from someone known for driving engineers to exhaustion with endless retakes. For Seger, who believed in capturing the moment, the comment was a slap in the face. He later told Rolling Stone, "Some people think more production means better music," which many insiders interpreted as a subtle jab at Henley's sterile, over-controlled process. Things escalated further in 1981 at an industry party filled with producers, label reps, and other heavyweights. Henley allegedly questioned the legitimacy of Seger's songwriting credits in front of a crowd, and Seger, uncharacteristically, confronted him head-on. The two men nearly came to blows before security intervened. The hostility wasn't just personal, it was philosophical. Henley viewed Seger as lucky, someone who stumbled into success without truly understanding the craft, while Seger saw Henley as a control-obsessed elitist who had lost touch with emotional truth. There's a difference between being lucky and being good. Henley reportedly told the Los Angeles Times, never naming Seger, but making his opinion loud and clear. From that point forward, the two actively avoided each other, refusing joint interviews, sidestepping festivals, and maintaining a tense, silent détente. For Henley, Seger symbolized the amateur popularity without polish, fame without finesse, and he never forgave him for it. But perhaps the most ironic and emotionally charged rivalry in Seger's long career was the one he shared with Bruce Springsteen, the very man critics endlessly compared him to. On paper, they were twin flames, two hard-nosed storytellers from working-class roots, writing anthems about struggle, hope, and redemption. But behind the scenes, their similarities didn't foster respect, they sparked resentment. The trouble started in the mid-70s, when reviewers began stacking night moves against Born to Run, and turned the page against Thunder Road. Suddenly, there was a new debate in town. Who was the real voice of America's forgotten class? According to music journalist Dave Marsh, Springsteen once told his E Street Band, "Seger writes about the working man like he's watching him through a window." It was a brutal critique, not of Seger's music, but of his soul. Springsteen, saw himself as someone who lived the life, who bled on stage night after night, scraping truth from the bottom of every verse. To him, Seger's polished sound felt too comfortable, too manufactured. In a 1978 interview with a British journalist, Springsteen famously said, "Authenticity can't be manufactured," which many took as a veiled insult aimed directly at Seger. The rivalry flared when Seger's Against the Wind began outperforming Springsteen's The River on multiple year-end lists, shocking fans and critics alike. Springsteen was reportedly livid, not because of competition, but because he believed Seger's success diluted what authentic storytelling should be. Their team started quietly feuding, refusing to share billing at concerts or festivals. At one charity benefit in 1981, Springsteen's manager reportedly insisted that Bruce would only perform if he got top billing over Seger. When word reached Seger, he was stunned. "We're both trying to tell the same stories," he told his team. "Why does it have to be a fight?" But to Springsteen, there was only room for one king of the blue-collar narrative. In his eyes, Seger was an imposter, someone wearing the crown without earning the scars. And then there was Jackson Browne, not a rival by origin, but a friend-turned-enemy in a feud so personal it nearly derailed both of their careers. In the early 1970s, Browne and Seger were close, drawn together by their shared love of acoustic storytelling and lyrical depth. They jammed together in California bungalows, traded verses, and even toyed with the idea of forming a supergroup. Browne respected Seger's voice. Seger admired Browne's introspection. For a while, it seemed like they were on the verge of creating something legendary together. But everything fell apart in 1975 during the recording of Beautiful Loser, the album that would define Seger's rise. Browne had agreed to produce parts of the record, hoping to shape it into something intimate and soulful. But Seger had other plans. He wanted power, volume, anthemic grandeur. According to session guitarist Waddy Wachtel, it got ugly fast. Browne walked out mid-session after Seger re-recorded multiple tracks behind his back, changing the tone and arrangement without input. Feeling betrayed, Browne reportedly told friends, "He used me to get to the label, then threw me away like garbage." The wound went deep. When Browne's The Pretender exploded in 1976, Seger fired back in private, allegedly telling his bandmates, "Some people sell their souls for success." Browne, in turn, took jabs during interviews, calling Seger a user who doesn't understand loyalty. What had once been a genuine friendship devolved into icy silence. Friends were forced to pick sides. The Los Angeles music scene became split, some siding with the poetic Browne, others with the raw sincerity of Seger. Planned collaborations evaporated, industry events turned awkward, and while both men would later express regret in separate interviews, the damage had been done. What might have been one of rock's great creative partnerships died on the studio floor, a casualty of pride, miscommunication, and the never-ending war between heart and ambition.